Hey, Jason,
Yes, Gary.
that question everybody asks right now is, are you staying warm?
Well, yes. Are you staying warm?
I am.
That's
I
good.
am staying warm. Ah, that's interesting.
Well,
You know, somebody gave me a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, and they shall remain synonymous, whoever it was that gave that to me. And so they wants to hear the vocabulary word that he learned and could not remember. And so if you're not an elephant, you don't remember too well.
Yeah.
And so we will transmogrify.
Transmogrify. That's another vocabulary
word. But he can't remain that right one. And so
there's Hobbes. You know, Calvin gets to read comic books while Hobbes does his homework. That's the whole premise.
and
So Hobbes says, don't mention it. I'm learning some good words this way. You know, these beets aren't bad, and they certainly are salubrious.
awesome.
I told you I learned that word from Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
One of our coworkers in Italy wanted to learn real Italian, not just book Italian, and so he got comic books.
Yeah.
And learned Italian through comic books. You know, there are people who actually watch this thing and learn something from it. This thing that we do. I know it's hard to imagine, but two of our longtime viewers, not the one who's no longer doing it long distance, one who's physically present is a longtime viewer, but these were two longtime viewers, and he called me the other day and he said he had a surprise for me.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was a tasty surprise, but then he said it was also salubrious.
There
And so
you
he
go.
must have been watching.
Oh no.
And so it was
Oh.
a box.
Oh,
It was
banana.
it is empty.
Oh, that's good.
And the reason it's empty,
It's because you ate them all.
no, I have not eaten all of them, but out of great appreciation for your dietary restraint
Yes.
and knowing your great affinity for banana flavored stuff,
Man.
there's one temptation that's almost too much for you to bear,
It
and
would
that's
be
banana.
Banana moon pies would be. They would. Yes.
And
would
I did not want to walk in tonight with a banana moon pie
get thee behind me banana moon
and
pies.
tempt you with that.
Okay.
But see, they're learning all sorts of stuff. They're learning salubrious. They know that moon pies are salubrious,
They are very salubrious.
and so the things that they learn.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about salubriousness tonight.
I forgot what we're going to talk about tonight.
I hope we remember as we go along. How about if we talk about Daniel?
Yes.
How about Daniel in the lion's den?
Not yet.
Oh man.
Not yet.
I looked ahead, and guess who gets to talk about Daniel in the lion's den?
I think it might be me.
Yeah, I think it's you. Gets to do Daniel in the lion's den. Okay, let's do something. You know what would be fun? If we had a story about this guy who turned into an animal. Yeah, and he had claws. His fingernails were like claws, and his hair grew and like feathers and stuff. That'd be a cool story. But
that would be a cool story.
we
but you don't get to talk about that one either.
We probably can't.
Well, he doesn't.
We can't find anything like that anyway. So, and I was just dreaming about this guy that turned into.
There's going to be another dream tonight too.
There are dreams. You get the dreams too. You get the dreams. You get the lions. Oh well. In Daniel chapter 3, we began with an image that Nebuchadnezzar sets up, and he gives an image or an order concerning that image. In the first 7 verses, it says that Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces. That's everybody. I don't know who got left out. were a symbol for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. That's like everybody and every kind of musical instrument ever invented.
You tell me what some of those are, because I don't know what a couple of those
I know
are.
what a horn is. And
I
a
know
flute.
what a bagpipe.
I know a flute.
Oh, yeah.
A lyre, kind of like that.
Like David played.
Yeah. A trigon is something that has three of it. And psaltery is maybe, I don't know, is that some kind of a harp type thing too? Or
Sure.
maybe it's a drum, I don't know.
I don't know.
He set up a golden image, and that was one big image.
It was big.
It was 60 cubits, and if a cubit's a foot and a half, that comes, if you're the math teacher,
well-
60 cubits at a foot and a half per cubit ends up to be how many feet?
About 90 feet.
And if it's 6 cubits wide at a foot and a half per cubit, it's going to be,
That's 9 feet.
that is a lot.
I think I measured one time, and I think from the front of the stage to the back of the back wall there, I think that's a little over 80 feet.
So it's about,
So maybe all the way to the door, from the front of the stage all the way back to the door. That's about 90 feet.
about 90 feet. So that's a one big statue.
That's
One
big.
of the images I saw on the internet had the not the statue being this high, but being up on a pedestal, so that it was, because that's a little bit out of proportion to be 90 feet tall and only 6 feet wide. That doesn't seem proportional, but whatever it was one big image. And he called everybody, all the rulers, and they were told to fall down and worship. The penalty was that if you do not fall down and worship, you're going to immediately be cast into a furnace. And as tempted as some of us are this time of year at minus X degrees, that would not be a good thing. And so he sets up the image, and the order is issued. You fall down and worship when you hear the music, or you're going to get tossed into a fiery furnace. In the next few verses, we have an accusation against some of the people, certain ones. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, "O king, live forever. You yourself, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up." We don't know how long this was after the dream that he had of that image with the golden head and so forth. At that time, he acknowledged God.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some indication that maybe many years have passed. But no matter what, he did not get the message, because now he's setting this image up to be worshipped. And these are certain Chaldeans who are making this charge. We saw the Chaldeans last time, and the different soothsayers and everybody. And you made a good point there that humanly, if Daniel would have been like some of the rest of us, he would have let them go, because they're charlatans anyway. And when he told the dream and interpreted the dream for the king, he could have easily said, "Those guys are fake," and let them suffer the fate. But he saved every one of them. Mm-hmm. And it shows you what kind of person he is, that he was willing to save not only his own skin, but he saved the skins of all of them. And look how they say thank you.
They try to get back. They try to get rid of the ones that saved them.
Yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel are the ones that saved them. They're the ones that prayed for them. Prayed for God to give the dream and the interpretation. And this is how they respond. And so you see how jealousy and hatred work, mm-hmm. that they get to you. On some TV show this week, I heard someone say that that hatred corrodes the vessel it's contained in. That hatred corrodes the vessel it's contained in, and that's what's happening here. Is they hate these Hebrews so much that although the Hebrews saved their lives, they want to see them gone, and that you made a decree, and so you did this, and there are certain Jews whom you have appointed. That sounds just a little bit about like Adam and Eve, the woman that you made, laying a little bit of blame on him for putting them where they are. These men have disregarded you, which would have been probably the ultimate insult for someone at that level. Basically, the ruler of the world was not in the habit of being disregarded. And so they make a big deal about these three that didn't fall down. Daniel obviously wasn't here. He served in a large part of the kingdom, and so he wasn't around when this happened.
And what they say when these men have disregarded you is not even true. That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have proven themselves loyal to the king.
Yeah, that's all they've done.
They've proven their usefulness to the king, and they're not disregarding the king. They're just putting God ahead of the king.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a good point. They've demonstrated how faithful they are in everything, but it's not exactly a true accusation. But Nebuchadnezzar, nevertheless, is not happy, as you would expect from somebody in that position. And so, in rage and anger, he gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you're ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you will not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" He has a little bit of mercy because he gives them a second chance.
Right.
And the order was that you don't bow down, you get tossed into the furnace. But he does give them a second chance, and maybe he is giving them the benefit of the doubt that they weren't quite ready, or they didn't know it, or and so he's going to give them that second chance. But he is filled with rage and anger. He is very upset that someone has disregarded him, and so he asks them, point out, is it true? What they've told me about you? Is it true? So if you're ready, you want a second chance. And then he says something that's pretty prophetic. He says, "What God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" He didn't know that was a real question. He thought it was a rhetorical question, that there's nobody who can save you from me because I am it. I am the most powerful person on the face of the earth. And so he expects a negative answer. In verses 16 through 18, the three men give their response to the king. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." The king asks them, is it true? Is this what really happened? And their response is, we don't have to give you an answer. We don't need to answer your question, which probably didn't make him very happy either when the king gives them the second chance and they say, we don't have to give you a response. If it's what God wants, he is able to deliver us. You say what God can deliver you out of my hand. Our God can. So if that's what he chooses. But the second part is the part I really like, because they say, but even if he does not, that doesn't change anything. If God does not, we are not going to serve your gods or worship the image. Mm-hmm. God is who he is regardless. It doesn't have anything to do with what we do with that image, whether he saves us or doesn't save us. Nothing matters, because God is who he is, and we are not going to reject him.
It makes me think of a statement Job makes in the reading that we've had so far this week. Though he slay me, yet I will, is it trust in him or hope in him? Or
hope, yeah.
Hope in him. So Yeah, I mean, Job's response to his friends were his friends who accused him of evil doing, which Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have been accused of evil. And Job's response basically is, I don't owe a response to you.
Yeah.
I don't owe you men anything who are accusing me of evil. I put my trust in God, and though he slay me, I will put my hope in him.
And that's a really good example, because Job took place in the midst of total chaos. Nobody knew what was going on. At least nobody on earth knew what was going on. But didn't change the fact of who God is.
Right.
And what God expects from us. And too often we allow ourselves to be swayed by circumstances that don't impact who God is, because God is who God is regardless of what he does or doesn't do that we want him to do or think he should do. He is always God. Well, the only choice now is the punishment. Nebuchadnezzar can't, well, he didn't want to back down, but even if he wanted to back down, he couldn't back down. And so he has to mete out this punishment in verses 19 through 22. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king was furious. He was filled with wrath, so much that his facial expression altered. Is it Belshazzar whose knees go knocking together?
Yes.
It's amazing how some of these things show up, how the emotions come through in the story, in the Bible. And you can imagine the change on the look on his face when these people answered him that way. And so he said, heat that thing up 7 times. I don't think that's a number. I think that's hotter than possible. It's like, how many times do I forgive my brother 7 times? And Jesus says, no, 70 times 7. It's not an actual number, but it's a big number.
Didn't have a thermometer?
He didn't have a thermometer and that old dial that cranked it up a little bit. Just put some more wood on the fire. And he commanded certain valiant warriors. These are people who are used to responding to whatever the king says without questioning. And throughout these ancient empires, through the Roman times, if a Roman emperor or even general told one of his soldiers to fall on his sword, he fell on his sword. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't hesitate. He fell on his sword. And these valiant warriors were trained to do exactly what Nebuchadnezzar told them to do without even stopping to think. And so some of them were killed when they got so close. The fire was so hot that if they got very close to it as they threw the 3 men in, it killed some of them. There's no doubt that this was a fire that was hot enough to kill people, because you didn't have to go into the fire to be killed. You just got near the fire and it took you out. And so you might expect the outcome to not be too great for our friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the fire, the furnace of the blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He responded and said to his high officials, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "Certainly, O king." He answered and said, "Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." They put 3 men in there, and now there are 4 people walking around, and they were all bound up in their trousers, and now they're not bound up at all. They're just walking around. They were tossed into the middle of that fire. They weren't just standing around the edges where the other people were killed. They were tossed right into the middle of that furnace. But the king was astounded by what he saw, and he jumped up quickly. Didn't we put 3 men in there? I see 4 of them, and they're loose, and they're walking around, and that 4th one looks like a son of the gods. Was it?
I don't know.
Thought maybe I'd get you on that one. I don't know. That would give me a head start when we get to Daniel, seeing Jesus in the book of Daniel. You're not gonna venture a guess on that one, huh?
I think it's possible that it was, but I don't. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar is an authority on celestial beings and their
No,
appearance.
he's probably not an
So-
authority on Christology or angelology
Yeah.
or any of those things. I think he just saw a heavenly being, someone who did not look human.
He recognized three of them, and one of them he didn't.
Yeah, one of them he
And one of
didn't
them was
recognize, and there was something about the appearance of that fourth one that wasn't like the other three, and that's about all we can say about it.
Yeah.
You will be amazed, won't be amazed to know that Nebuchadnezzar was amazed at this outcome. He came near to the door of the furnace, the blazing fire, and he responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their head singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. And so Nebuchadnezzar, who said, throw them in, said, come on out. And he addresses them as servants of the Most High God. And all the other rulers came gathering around, and they didn't even smell like smoke. Their hair wasn't singed, their clothes were immaculate, and it's like they'd never been tossed in.
You think they were greeted warmly by, that was no pun, but greeted warmly,
Yeah, greeted warmly, yeah.
by the Chaldeans who accused them in the first place?
You wonder if they were greeted warmly or coolly, or if I were those Chaldeans, I'd be worried.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be just a little bit worried about my stand on things when I found myself coming up against three men like that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people don't learn their lessons, though, and they just keep repeating their lessons. But that's a good thing to wonder about. What was going on in their minds? They thought they had these guys dead, and instead these guys come walking out of that fire, and instead of the king being angry with them, he calls them servants of the Most High God. Not only does he do that, but he makes a proclamation. He responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. And the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. They were already pretty high up in the government, but he rewarded them with even higher reward. He said, Blessed be the God of these three men. And he issued a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that says anything offensive against their God is going to be torn from limb to limb, and their houses are going to be reduced to a rubbish heap, because there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. His question was, what God can deliver you from me? And he found the answer. There is one God. There's no other God, but there is one God who is able to deliver them in this way. And so Nebuchadnezzar has learned his lesson. He never again slips into his previous mindset.
And he lived happily ever
And he
after.
lived happily ever after. That is the end of the story of Nebuchadnezzar. He was one happy ruler because he had learned the truth about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel.
That punishment he mentions there, that's kind of his go-to, because that was the punishment in chapter 1 when they couldn't tell him the dream. That's what was going to happen to him. If you can't tell me the dream, you'll be torn limb from limb, and your house is reduced to a rubbish heap.
Yeah.
So that's extreme. So extreme. I mean, not you're going to go to jail. You're going to be torn limb from limb.
Yeah. They'll be torn limb from limb.
He's serious.
Later, after they go into captivity, and then the Persians let them come back, and then our enemies say they're rebellious, and so they stopped the building of the temple, and then they sent back and said, check it out in your records. And the king checked it out, and he said, we did check it out, and they're right. They do have a right to rebuild this. And one of his punishments, we're going to use a beam out of your house and run you through with it. Wasn't that one of them?
Mm-hmm.
These guys aren't kidding. They are ruthless. But anyway, the story of Nebuchadnezzar ends happily ever after.
Until chapter 4.
Oh, okay.
So, chapter 4, there's another vision, there's a dream, there's interpretation, there's Chaldeans, there's all kinds of stuff again. So, verses 1 through 3 says, Nebuchadnezzar, the king to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language that live in all the earth, may your peace abound. It has seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation.
See, he got it. He got it. He
gets
understands.
it. But this is, as the commentary mentioned, is kind of, it starts with the end, and then it tells the story, and then it goes back to the end
Oh,
again.
it starts at the end and goes
So
back to
this
where,
is-
where it
this-
says
yeah.
2 weeks later, earlier, or 1
Yeah.
year earlier. So
Yeah, we have,
there's this, and then there's a little sign on the screen that
7
says
periods of
one
time or-
one
yeah.
year earlier, or whatever
Yeah.
it ends up being.
so the interesting thing here is this kind of a unique chapter within the Bible, whereas this is Nebuchadnezzar's own words. I mean, the book we attribute to Daniel, but this is from Nebuchadnezzar's own chronicles, or
Yeah.
his own accounting of this story. So it's a first-hand account from a pagan source. Nebuchadnezzar, despite some of the things that he says, would still be considered a pagan because he's got a wide range of gods that he refers to and that he relies upon. Even though it seems through the story that he gets closer and closer to the truth, still an interesting source to be included in the scriptures. And this is written in the form of a royal decree that would have been written and distributed throughout the kingdom. This was not something that was just going to go into his personal library as an accounting of his story and was going to kind of be shut away from everybody. This was something that was distributed throughout his kingdom. So we're getting an account that everybody in the kingdom would have read. And despite the proclamation here and at the end of the chapter, there is no way of knowing if Nebuchadnezzar was ever really fully converted to following the one true God. He says a lot of good things. He says a lot of the right things that we would hope he would say if he were truly converted. And yet, there's some indications along the way, like in chapter 3, where he still seems to be dabbling in other gods. If not dabbling, then fully committed to them. So it could be that his proclamations of God as the Most High God means he's higher than all the other gods I serve, but I still serve lots of other gods. So we'd like to think of Nebuchadnezzar as becoming a full-on believer, but I don't know that we can be dogmatic about claiming that one way or the other. It's possible he was. It's possible that he wasn't.
There are a lot of these people that we just don't know. Pharaoh, for example, with Joseph, recognized who was able to tell him the
Right.
meaning of the dream. You see Pilate and the things that he acknowledged about Jesus. You know, I've written what I've written. He's the King of the Jews.
Right.
But you just don't know what their eventual fate was.
Right.
And I'm sure that's on purpose because that's not the point. But it is interesting that so many times Nebuchadnezzar seems to be so close, but you just wonder how close he is.
Right. So now we get into the story, verses 4 through 9, kind of lay the foundation for us of the story. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream, and it made me fearful. And these fantasies as I lay on my bed and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. So I gave orders to bring into my presence all the wise men of Babylon, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the conjurers, the Chaldeans, the diviners came in, and I related to them the dream, but they could not make its interpretation known to me. But finally Daniel came in before me, whose name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and whom is a spirit of the holy gods. And I related the dream to him, saying, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, since I know that a spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery baffles you, tell me the visions of my dream, which I have seen, along with its interpretation.
And by the way, we were talking a few weeks ago about why we know Daniel by one name and then we know the others by the other language. And somebody suggested that the Belteshazzar does have their God built into that, and that may be why in the Hebrew scriptures is usually referred to as Daniel, and why Nebuchadnezzar would choose to refer to him by that name that's taken from his own God.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's interesting how this time he told him the dream,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
and they wasn't able to interpret it, you know, which makes me think that be making stuff up. Because, you know, maybe they
Yeah.
remember from the last time, you know, that they made stuff up, you know, what would happen to them. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. My guess is if he would have told them the dream the first time, that they would have come up with an interpretation of it regardless. That if he would have told them, they would have made up something, especially if
Right.
he would have said, if you don't tell me the meaning of the dream, then you're all going to die.
Right.
But you're right, Chuck, that by now they probably have a little bit more wisdom about that. And they know by now, even though he tells them the dream, they're not able to do it.
And they may be as relieved to see Daniel come in as the king is to see Daniel come in as well. They know that they can't deliver an interpretation, but their hope is in Daniel, because if Daniel can appease the king, then we all get to live. But if Daniel can't do it, then we're probably all in trouble. So, and this, you know, the accounting of this dream is different in the way that Nebuchadnezzar describes it. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about last week with that, you know, there's something about these dreams, these visions, that Nebuchadnezzar knows this is different. This isn't your everyday dream of weird stuff happening like you and I have. But there's something about this dream that troubles the king, and he understands that there's more at work here than just his subconscious playing tricks on him. This dream comes at a time when the king is at ease, and usually when we're at peace, when we're at ease, that's when our sleep is the best. That's when we're not troubled in our sleep. That's not when we have difficulty sleeping or difficulty with dreams or things like that. So the fact that it comes at a time when he is at ease, I think lends to the difficulty that he has with the vision itself. So he's troubled by what he sees. He doesn't understand it, and he seeks counsel as to its meaning. So he calls in the same cast of characters, the magicians, the Chaldeans, these yahoos that the first time around were unable to assist him. So the question always comes up, why not go straight to Daniel? Why not?
Yeah, he's the only one that knows the answer to these things.
And I thought an interesting answer to that may be that one reason that he may not have gone to Daniel first, because Daniel basically has been elevated to where he is directly under the authority of Nebuchadnezzar and nobody else, and we only trouble Daniel when all other avenues of help have been exhausted. Daniel doesn't get troubled with, you know, basic everyday things that other people can handle. And only when these other people can't handle it, then, okay, now it's time to bring in the big guns, so we go to Daniel. I thought that was an interesting theory about maybe that's why Daniel is not brought in until, so even for Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king of everything, still shows respect or deference to Daniel and doesn't call him in immediately. He waits to see if anyone else can answer it for him. The king then is glad when Daniel comes to his aid. I think he knows this, you know, this is his best chance at getting to the bottom of things, because he has seen what Daniel can do in the past.
you know, nowadays, for instance, if I have something, I want to go to a friend,
Uh-huh.
you know, that I can, you know, so it makes you wonder, you would think that the king and his second in command, so to speak, would have a closer relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be who he would first go to, you know, to discuss things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Yeah, I mean, by our reasoning, I think that might be a logical thing for us to think about. But I think if you think about the formalities that existed in their courts and in the hierarchy of the way things progressed, I think it might be more like almost like a military scenario where you start out, you don't go complain to the general unless you've complained to the lieutenant first or something, you know. Or I don't know if I said that right, but you follow the chain of command kind of thing. And I think that would be the way I would consider it more as being than like a personal friendship that existed between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel.
Even with Esther and the king, she couldn't go into his presence without being invited. And even when as they started to discuss what was happening, she said if it would just been a little thing, well, I wouldn't have bothered you, but it's it's bigger than that, and so
Yeah, there was a formality to her.
formality to her
the-
even her relationship
yeah.
with her husband. Another possibility is he might have been, he did a lot of things for the king that we don't
Sure.
know about. He may have been off on a mission.
Yeah, he
but-
might not have been immediately available.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the story progresses, verses 10 through 18. It says, so Daniel has now come to the king, and he's there, and now the king can relate to Daniel what happened. It says, now these were the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed. I was looking, and behold, there was a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew large and became strong, and its height reached to the sky, and it was visible at the end of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the sky dwelt in its branches, and all living creatures fed themselves from it. I was looking at the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed, and behold, an angelic watcher, a holy one, descended from heaven. He shouted out and spoke as follows: chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it, and the birds from under its branches. Yet leave the stump with its roots in the ground, but with a band of iron and bronze around it in the new grass of the field. And let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him share with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. This sentence is by the decree of the angelic watchers, and the decision is a command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whom he wishes, and sets over it the lowliest of men. This is the dream which I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belteshazzar, tell me its interpretation, inasmuch as none of the wise men of my kingdom is able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able, for a spirit of the holy gods is in you. So the dream is revealed, and it is interesting this time that Nebuchadnezzar reveals the dream up front rather than making Daniel reveal the dream to him before giving the interpretation. So, we can't be certain of why that takes place. We weren't certain of why Nebuchadnezzar did that in the first place in the first chapter. There was speculation about, did he trust the magicians? Did he even remember the dream himself? Or was it the idea that he couldn't remember it and he needed them to tell him the dream first? And this time he does remember it, at least we know that much. So he reveals that. He sees a great tree with tremendous influence. And the description of the tree is magnificent. It can be seen from the entire earth. It provided shade and salubrious food for all of the surrounding countryside, and it was, it had a tremendous influence. And then next comes an angelic watcher. And the angelic watcher is obviously a heavenly being that is sent to deliver a message from God, even though Nebuchadnezzar maybe sees this differently or doesn't understand with our understanding of God or Daniel's understanding of God. He kind of talks about the gods and things like that even in the midst of the dream. But this angelic watcher comes and he issues the command, obviously not his own command. He is an angel. He is a messenger, so he's coming from another source. And the command is to chop down, to cut off, to strip, and to scatter. And there's a fourfold pronunciation of judgment against this tree that that is to be completely carried out, and it demonstrates in that fourfold pronouncement that there is going to be an utter destruction of this tree, that there's nothing left standing. So the great influence of the tree is lost. So not only is the tree suffering, but all of those things that took shelter in the tree are suffering. The ones that were feeding from it, the ones that were resting in its shade, they are also affected by the loss of this tree. The stump, however, is left, and it's banded in a way that it preserves it, so that it is holding out the hope of restoration. It's holding out the hope of regrowth. And then in the message that comes next, the tree is personified by the words that are said. Let him have lose the man of a mind and take on the mind of a beast. And so the tree ceases to be tree-like and becomes more man-like.
It's not an it anymore. It's
Yeah.
it's he.
Right.
Him.
And so it's beginning, even in the dream itself, to kind of unfold some type of interpretation here where we're understanding that the tree really isn't a tree. And then it says 7 periods of time pass by, and that's where I'm going to hand it off to you.
Whatever a period of time is, whether
Okay.
it's probably a
There were 7
year,
of them. There
7
you go.
years.
Okay.
Well, we'll go with 7 years.
Okay. 7.
Now,
yeah.
I could interpret that dream. It wouldn't be right, but I could interpret it.
I could come up with a story.
It had something to do with Jason and a chainsaw and firewood, but it wouldn't be right. But
Okay.
luckily, the king knows where to get the right
Right.
answer instead of someone who just makes something up
Yeah.
as he goes.
And I think too that, I mean, the king, even there in what he says, he knows that Daniel's going to be able to give him the interpretation. I don't think he had any faith in the previous guys he asked in the first place.
No.
I think even if he had gotten an answer or a response from them, he wouldn't have felt like he could trust it.
That would have been about as good as my answer. I don't.
Yeah.
He would have known that wasn't the right answer.
But he knows that whatever Daniel tells him will be trustworthy. So now Daniel gets to deliver the message and the interpretation. It says, then Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, was appalled for a while as his thoughts alarmed him. The king responded and said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation alarm you. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, if only the dream applied to those who hate you and its interpretation to your adversaries. The tree that you saw, which became large and grew strong, whose height reached to the sky and was visible to all the earth, and whose foliage was beautiful and its fruit abundant, and in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and in whose branches the birds of the sky lodged, it is you, O king. For you have become great and grown strong, and your majesty has become great and reached to the sky, and your dominion to the end of the earth. And in that the king saw an angelic watcher, a holy one, descending from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, yet leave the stump with its roots in the ground, but with a band of iron and bronze around it in the new grass of the field, and let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him share with the beasts of the field until 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon the Lord my king, that you be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place be with the beasts of the field, and you be given grass to eat like cattle and drenched with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and he bestows it on whomever he wishes. And in that it was commanded to leave the stump with the roots of the tree, your kingdom will be assured to you after you recognize that it is heaven that rules. Therefore, O king, may my advice be pleasing to you. Break away now from your sins by doing righteousness, and from your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, in case there may be a prolonging of your prosperity. So Daniel is alarmed by the vision that he hears, and more so than by the vision itself, he's alarmed by his understanding of it. As the revelation is made known to him by God, what the vision means, that really is the alarm that Daniel begins to feel. And the king senses it. The king can see whether he sees it in his face, whether he senses it in the hesitation that Daniel has in beginning to speak. Whatever the source of his understanding, the king understands that Daniel is alarmed. He's worried about delivering this message to him. So the king urges him to tell the message, and I think we see the king's respect for Daniel in the way that he talks to him here. Don't be afraid to give me the news. Don't be afraid to tell me what it means. I'm not going to hold you responsible for the meaning of the vision. And then Daniel shows his loyalty and his feelings for Nebuchadnezzar in the way that he delivers it. A little foreshadowing for a future story in here. How is it that Daniel reveals the news to is it Belshazzar?
Belshazzar, the many tickled you first, and that wasn't so gentle.
Daniel doesn't seem to be too disturbed by the message that he delivers to Belshazzar.
No, that's pretty pointed.
If Daniel didn't like or didn't have an affection for King Nebuchadnezzar, I don't think he would have any alarm here or any trouble telling Nebuchadnezzar what the dream meant. So I think we're revealed something here about how Daniel feels about the king. The tree is Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar had the first dream with the big statue and the head of gold, and he was that head of gold. He was the most prominent part of that statue. Here he has this dream about a tree that's very prominent, and he is the tree. Nebuchadnezzar keeps dreaming about himself. The tree being chopped down means that he's going to lose his kingdom. He's going to be driven from mankind to live among the beasts. And his humiliation, and this really is what this is, it's the humiliation of Nebuchadnezzar. That's what this is being done for, is to humiliate him. And it would last for the amount of time that it would take for him to realize that it is heaven that rules. It is not God, or it is not Nebuchadnezzar that is in control of all this that's going on. It is God that's in control of all that's going on. And the sooner Nebuchadnezzar realizes that, the better off he'll be. verses 28 through 33, says, all this happened to Nebuchadnezzar the king. 12 months later, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. The king reflected, said, is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared sovereignty has been removed from you, and you will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field. You'll be given grass to eat like cattle, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. Immediately the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled, and he was driven away from mankind and began eating grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. The fulfillment of the dream. It's interesting that this part of the story is no longer in the first person.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
I don't know. Maybe he was kind of out of himself when he wasn't really there. When
If he was not in his right mind, he had to rely on the account that other people told him this is what happened. You were walking on your palace on the roof of your palace one day, and all of a sudden you started mooing like a cow. I mean, you left and you went out and ate grass for 7 periods of time, or 7 years, or whatever it was. And so he's relying on the details of that story being filled in by other people, because he was out of his mind. Right. He was given the mind of a beast. So he is not capable of telling this part of the story because he wasn't aware of this part of the story. So this happens 12 months later. 12 months later, after the dream, after Daniel's interpretation of the dream has taken place, the king is on the roof of his palace and he's thinking about how great he is. He is literally speaking out loud and saying, look at my kingdom. Look at what I have built. Look at how awesome I am. I really am the greatest king ever. I mean, he's saying these things out loud to himself. And the voice from heaven comes and says, it's time for you to understand who really is in charge. And so the thing that we kept coming back to, well, we're going to get there in just a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the result is immediate. The voice from heaven speaks, and it's not 3 days later that Nebuchadnezzar decides to go eat grass. It's immediately. He leaves that spot that moment. His humiliation, his humbling begins in that moment. So verses 34 to 37, but at the end of that period, first person again, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of earth, and no one can ward off his hand or say to him, what hast thou done? At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and my splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. My counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are true, and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. So Nebuchadnezzar comes to his senses. And you can imagine, he's out there in the field, he's eating, maybe he has a mouthful of grass. I don't know. I mean, he's been living as an animal for 7 periods of time, and he looks up to heaven and his senses return to him. And he's out in the middle of a field eating grass. I mean, I can't imagine what that must have been like for him, or how he must have experienced that, but it all comes to him. This is what this means. This is why this had to happen. I've got to acknowledge God. I've got to acknowledge that he's the one that gave me this kingdom. He's the one that put me here. I'm not the one that built this kingdom. I'm not the one that did this. And so with the return of his reason, he begins once again to be sought out by his nobles. And it's interesting there that he doesn't have to reassert dominion. He doesn't have to go out and threaten to tear people limb from limb and make their houses a rubbish heap. He, by the exercise of his reason, by the exercise of his faculties, they begin to seek him out once again. And so I think that once again demonstrates for us that it's not Nebuchadnezzar that is doing this. It's God that is establishing that kingdom for him, that he's sending those people to seek them out. And so did Nebuchadnezzar fully submit to God? Boy, it sure sounds like it there at the end. I mean, it sure sounds like he's saying all of the right things. He acknowledges that it's God who is in control. He acknowledges that the Most High is the one that establishes kings. He even calls God the king. He went from saying, I'm the greatest king that's ever lived, to saying, God is the king. And so, boy, he says all of the right things. He seems to have the right attitude. He makes it public. He doesn't do this in private. He sends this out as a public decree, and lets people know even of his own humiliation. I mean, how humiliating would it be for a king like Nebuchadnezzar to tell all of your royal subjects, I went and lived it like a cow for 7 years? And yet he does that in a way to acknowledge that God is really in charge. It would be really neat to think that we get to heaven one day, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar there because he acknowledged God and because he was fully converted. I'm not in charge of that. He did. He said all the right things before, and then still was humbled in this way. And that I think, as far as like for our theme for this year and what we are working on right now, even in some of the things that we're facing in our society and our politically and socially and just on so many different levels, the biggest obstacle to submission is pride. We saw that time and again in Ezekiel as we went through that book. Why did God give all of those judgments against the surrounding nations? Because of their pride. Why did God time and again have to humble the Israelites? Because in their arrogance, they tried to lay him aside and tried to do their own thing. Why did God do this to Nebuchadnezzar? It was pride. I mean, that is the reason that Nebuchadnezzar was humbled, was because he was too proud. And it was his pride that caused him to fail to be able to see that it was God that was in control. And so as we think about this theme of submission that we have through the year, the biggest enemy that we have to that is pride.
Hey, Chuck, do we have any questions? Is it a right one? What was it? Oh, that was the second one. Well,
one too many.
Talk amongst yourselves later. Why do some of the Chaldeans report the 3 Jews to the king?
Tattletales.
And how do they respond to the king's instruction? Didn't change anything.
Yeah.
What are the details of Nebuchadnezzar's dream? Why is Daniel reluctant to give the interpretation? And he actually gives the king advice, if you just do this and everything's going to be okay. And then why does God give Nebuchadnezzar, drive him from the palace? And so you talk among yourselves and come up with the answers to those questions.